Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to our first ever affordable housing, and Auntie Manu will can speak to that. But anyway, our speaker series, we're starting off with Justin Tyndall. But I did want to provide some context to Justin about what Hulihia is, and it's basically rethinking how we approach Hawaii's most pressing challenges, which is housing, and looking at how um, um, a creative media lens placed on that could help provide additional lenses as our decision makers view this problem as well. But yeah, I did want to hand this off to Marian, who will do the official welcome.
Great. Well, aloha mai kako. And once again, thank you, Charlotte, for welcoming us to the space and talking a little bit about the Hulihia initiative. I just put the link to our Hulihia initiative website in the chat, so feel free to check that out. After today's wonderful and rich discussion with Justin Tyndall. So aloha. We just want to welcome you, Justin Tyndall, for joining us today, for being willing to kind of like jump into this kind of like space of change and unknown. Hulihia is a time of change. And no matter what, like what we can count on in life is things are constantly changing and evolving. A short introduction about Justin Tyndall. He is an associate professor of economics at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. His research focuses on urban issues, particularly housing markets. He is the lead author of U Hero's annual Hawaii Housing Fact Book, which provides data-driven analysis of the state's housing market. Justin holds a PhD in urban land economics from the University of British Columbia and a Master of Urban Planning from New York University. So, on behalf of UH West Oahu Academy of Creative Media, Justin, we want to send you a warm welcome and mahalo nui for joining us this morning.
Great. Yeah. Mahalo for that. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. Would you like me to get started?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Great. One second. Sorry, just having some lag and sharing my screen. Okay, is that look okay? Great. Okay, so sorry about that. So great. Thanks so much for the invitation. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to this group. So this sounds like a very interesting initiative. I'm excited to see where you guys go with it, and any contributions that I could make, I would be very happy to do that. Um, so I'm going to be giving sort of a broad overview of the housing market in Hawaii. Talk about some affordability issues, sort of where we're at, and some of the sort of big policy barriers that we face in making housing more affordable. So that was a great introduction. So I don't need to do it again, but I'm Justin Tyndall. So yeah, most of my research is on housing. I also do some stuff on transportation. My background is in urban planning as well as economics. So I sort of take an economics approach to important urban questions. So today, yeah, I'm just going to sort of summarize this main findings we have from this housing fact book. So this is what last year's cover looked like. So we've been doing this. This is the fourth year. We'll be putting out a version of the fact book. So the timing's kind of interesting because we're currently working on producing the new version right now. So it should come out in about 3 weeks, depending on when we get our act together. So most of the information in this presentation is actually updated for the new data that hasn't come out yet. So you get a sneak peek. So the sort of goal of this project, though, was to try to fill a need for policy relevant research on housing. So, sorry. So, we're, for one, sitting on a lot of data on the housing market. So, Bureau has for a long time done, various research projects on the housing market, usually quite data driven. So we spend a lot of time sort of replying to policymakers, media, nonprofit groups to share the data resources we had. So one goal of this project was to just get data out there publicly so everyone could use it. So that was one goal. And the other one was to, try to say something intelligent about sort of where we're at in terms of policy changes in the housing market, and talk about sort of important changes over the past year that have had an impact on the housing market. So, this is kind of what part of the fact book looks like. So, this is the effort to get the data out there. So, for the state and the counties and down to individual zip codes, we have these data pages, that cover sort of everything we have in terms of housing market indicators. So we have complete data on property transactions that have occurred over the last 30 years. So we can have very specific data, neighborhood level data on prices, transaction information. We create affordability metrics, look at current housing stock, information on zoning across neighborhoods, some stuff on transportation, access to employment that differs by neighborhood, demographic information, rental market data, all these type of things that we try to make as available as possible. The other way we try to share it is we also have a web version that's PDFs. We also have this sort of interactive version of the fact book where you can build your own sheets to try to tap into all of this economic housing data that we have available, selecting down to individual neighborhoods. So yeah, these are all accessible through our website. They're hopefully an interesting starting point for a lot of housing research questions if you're trying to get sort of basic data and information on housing market indicators at the state, county, or neighborhood levels. Okay, so to start a sort of overview of where we're at in terms of the housing market. So, I mean, the rumors are true. Housing is very expensive in Hawaii. So this is just looking at the 5 most and least expensive states in the country in terms of the median price of a home. So, we're number 1, and it's not particularly close, right? So it's significantly more expensive here to purchase a house than any other state, including other notoriously high cost states like California, for example. So the median price of homes across our entire housing stock, over $800,000. This is single family homes and condominiums. To buy a house in Hawaii, for the same price, you could buy like 5 houses in Mississippi, right? So we're like way out of the norm in terms of the costs to purchase a house, right? And prices have gone up fairly consistently, in recent history. So the 2007-2008 financial crisis, sort of one historical downturn, but actually we were affected less than other places. So we've had this pretty consistent rise in prices for the past decades. Sort of zooming in on the most recent period here, right? So, more recently during COVID, like some other places, but it was particularly pronounced here, we saw an increased run up in home prices for both single family homes and condominiums. So there was, double-digit price increases, already starting from a high baseline. We had some research looking at migration patterns, right? So, there's a lot of different things that affect prices, but, one part of the story of, people looking for more space during COVID, there was an increase in people from California moving to Hawaii, for example, during the pandemic. So there was some increase in demand. But this was also sort of a national story. A lot of people started working from home. People otherwise just wanted more space because they were spending more time at home during COVID. So there was this increased pressure on, increased demand for housing that increased during the pandemic that also showed up here. We sort of look at the final 2 data points here So the orange is single family homes and the green is condominiums. Single family homes went up very slightly in the past year, right? So there's been a little bit of leveling off. But actually, for the last 2 years, condominium prices have gone down in nominal terms, right? So, if you bought a condominium 2 years ago, so things go up and down. There's no way you would have known, but this hasn't been a great investment over the last couple of years, right? And this is sort of, um, with few exceptions, going back to 2008, condo prices have tended to increase almost every year. But yeah, we seem to see this leveling off or even decline in prices recently. Why is that? I think there's a couple reasons. One issue has been problems with the insurance market for condominiums. So this has also been a national story, but also perhaps a bit pronounced in Hawaii. The premiums for insuring a condominium building have skyrocketed across the US. Root cause very related to climate change, but for various reasons, insurance companies have decided that they had been underpricing insurance policies. One major insurer pulled out of Hawaii altogether because they thought it wasn't worth it. And just the policies to insure a condominium have gone up significantly. The longer version of the story, right, is that in order to get a mortgage on a condominium unit, the building needs to be fully insured, right, for a bank to issue you a mortgage. So we were in a situation where a lot of condominiums did not have full insurance, meaning if you wanted to buy a condominium, you often couldn't get a mortgage on particular buildings. So this was a real problem for people who wanted to sell their condominium and people who wanted to buy a condominium, right? There was a decrease in demand because some people were boxed out of the market because they were unable to get a mortgage on particular buildings. So, that's one explanation for declining prices. It doesn't necessarily mean, things have gotten more affordable, right? If anything, it's made it a bit more difficult to purchase a condominium for people who need a mortgage, which is most people. So I think that's one part of the story. I think the other part is when we're talking about the state condominium market, we're mostly talking about Honolulu. This is, a large majority of condominiums in the state. And we have added a bit of supply. So, a recurring theme in economics and this presentation is, the role of supply and demand in determining prices. So, anyone who's walked around Ala Moana or Kaka'ako area, right, we see some new supply, some condominium construction. So we've had a rising supply of available condominiums because of new construction, which has also helped put a bit of downward pressure on prices. So this is one other way to look at price appreciation. So we include this in the fact book for neighborhoods, and this is looking at the whole state. So what this is this index we came up with to try to better capture the actual appreciation of homes over time. So, one story with condominiums here, right, is that we had some new condominiums come online. Actually, a lot of the new condominiums in Ala Moana, Kaka'ako area are very small, right? So they're expensive per square foot, but actually the prices are below average prices for homes in a lot of cases because they're quite small. So that's sort of capturing not that individual homes are getting more affordable, but just the types of homes that are transacting in a given year might be changing. So what this repeat sales index does is look only at homes that have sold multiple times over this period, calculates the appreciation of those homes, and then averages it across years. So this is capturing, not the role of composition changing over time, but the actual appreciation to the typical home in the state. So, the index is indexed to 2000. So, a home in 2000, the value has gone up 340%, or it's 4.4 times what it was at that point. So, if you bought $1 million home in 2000, on average, that home is now worth $4.4 million. So this is even larger than is implied by the change in median prices, suggesting that the affordability picture is even worse than you might think from median prices, because that we just look at the sort of consistent housing stock over time, the appreciation has been, even larger. So this has been a very enormous run up in prices, right? We're in a much different place than we were, 20 or 30 years ago in terms of the overall picture of prices. You know, one strength of the fact book, right, is we have this data down to the neighborhood level. So, you know, obviously just sort of telling a state level story here for convenience, but, you know, there's different stories for every neighborhood, right, in terms of price changes, you know, price levels, recent history. It's fairly large dispersion of prices, right, across neighborhoods in the state, which, yeah, try to bring that data to bear, right, to get that in there. Okay, I'll say a little bit about the rental market. So, you know, rents tend to go up every year by about 2.5% on average, fairly consistently. So, you know, we have expensive rents; they go up every year, but, you know, less volatile certainly than the for sale market, right? You know, the rent increases tend to be fairly consistent across years. And here again, we're looking at the 5 most and least expensive states. Here we used to be number 1, but now California has edged us out. So now we're number 2. You know, still incredibly expensive place to rent compared to other parts of the U.S. But you know, we're less way outside of the mean when compared to wanting to purchase a house, right? Uniquely difficult to purchase a house in Hawaii. You know, for renting, also, you know, very burdensome for a lot of people, but you know, they're sort of closer to California, not as far away from the national median as the for sale market. Okay, so you know, housing established is very expensive. You know, but you know, this wouldn't be too much of a problem if we were all millionaires, right? If we all had enough money to afford these high home prices. So here I have a couple of graphs trying to contextualize that as to like whether people can afford these prices and what share of people can afford these prices. So you know, this graph is takes a minute to think about maybe, but here we're looking at the share of median income you would need to afford the median house. Where for afford, we're meaning you're not spending more than 30% of your income on your mortgage payment, which is a typical sort of benchmark people use to represent whether you're housing burdened, right? You should be trying to keep your mortgage payments under 30% of your gross income. So, you know, if we go back 10 years and look at single family homes, we were at around 120%. So that means you have to earn a little bit above average as a family in order to afford a mortgage on the median priced home in the state, right? So, you know, currently median household income in the state is about $100,000. So here we're thinking about like something like $120,000 in total household income in order to comfortably afford a mortgage on the median house. And then, you know, things got much worse. So obviously this graph shoots up, you know, during 2020, 2021, you know, closer to 200%, right? So now we're looking more at you need about double the median income in order to afford a mortgage on the median house. So, you know, what changed so dramatically? We're just looking at prices, right? So prices went up a bit during COVID, but not this dramatically. You know, the other thing that moved around was interest rates. So have it right here, right? So you know, other things that are driving these figures is when we're thinking about people's ability to afford a mortgage, we're, you know, also thinking about the role of interest rates in setting those monthly payments. So, you know, with inflation and Federal Reserve policy changes through COVID, we saw an increase in interest rates in general and in mortgage interest rates as well. So mortgage interest rates doubled or, you know, more than tripled from, you know, trough to peak during COVID, right? So this made it much more expensive to afford a mortgage. So yeah, so we're in a, you know, much more difficult place in terms of affordability. You know, condominium market, similar story, but at a different level because median price condominiums are a bit lower. The blue line, the rental market, you know, unaffected by interest rates. Rent prices were not accelerating through COVID, right? We're just going up at relatively the same pace, right? So actually, we've seen a slight, you know, reduction in the share of median income you need to afford the median rental unit. So, one thing that's going on here too is, incomes go up a little bit every year, in recent history. So, if we're looking at the last couple of years when prices overall have been pretty flat, you know, flat prices over the long run will translate into better affordability as incomes tend to rise. So more people are able to meet those nominal prices as their incomes go up over time. And the other thing that's going on in the last couple of years is interest rates have creeped down a little bit, particularly over the 2025. So it's restored a little bit of affordability from sort of the worst part we were at, which was so this is my most optimistic graph, in a fairly bleak presentation. So, we seem to be headed in the right direction a little bit over the last couple of years. A few forces have been conspiring to make housing a little bit more affordable. Receding interest rates and a little bit of a supply effect, particularly. So this is to confuse things even a little more. So this is a similar graph, but phrased a little bit differently. So we were looking at the share of the median income you would need to afford these mortgages. But this is also incorporating the income distribution of the state and asking, what percentage of households actually have that much of income over time. So looking at single family homes, again, looking back 10 years, we were close to the 50% range. So this is saying, almost half of households in the state actually did have enough income that they would be able to afford the median home in the state. Right? And then through COVID, things got significantly worse. Now we're down to close to 20%. Right? So, walking down the streets in Hawaii, you pass 5 families, only one of them you'd expect to have the income to afford the median home, right? 80% of households don't have high enough income. Right? So this is, I don't have direct state-to-state comparisons, but I'm confident this is, lower here than anywhere else in the U.S. Right? This is, a very bad place for affordability generally, right? Vast majority of households, can't afford the housing in the state. I think the other caveat is a lot of households, fortunately, or for them, bought homes 10, 20, 50 years ago, right? So the ability to afford a mortgage on a new home is not relevant to the majority of households because the majority of households already own their own home. But this is extremely relevant for young people, new households, first-time home buyers, right, trying to enter the market. It's very difficult. Very few people have the income necessary. So this is looking at the gap between what it costs to rent versus what it costs to buy. So this has also changed a lot in recent years. So how you interpret these. So let's look at Big Island, for example, going back 10 years. This is close to zero, meaning it was pretty much a wash in terms of renting versus paying for a mortgage in terms of monthly payments, right? You're looking at like the median house on Big Island, right? Your rent and mortgage payments probably about $1,800, $2,000 a month, right? It was quite similar for the median home, whether you chose to buy or rent. This has changed quite a bit. So now, if you were thinking of getting a mortgage on the typical home on Big Island, you'd be paying about $1,200 a month more than what you would be paying to rent the same type of home. And this gap is, much more stark elsewhere, right? So if we look on Maui, for example, the gap is about $3,000, right? So sort of, privilege or ability to own your own home, you're paying an extra $3,000 every month versus renting, right? So, it started at the beginning, rents are expensive, but, they're nothing compared to how out of whack home prices are, right? In terms of the ability of people to afford them, right? So this sort of shows up here that we have this enormous gap between renting and buying, and just in the current market, for most people, it might just not make sense to purchase a home, right? There's lots of personal reasons why people would want to do that anyways, right? Stability being a big one. But the math has gotten much more difficult for people to afford a home, right? It's payments on a mortgage are much more hard to manage for people now, particularly when you think of your outside option potentially being renting. For a lot of people, it increasingly makes sense to rent rather So, one visible, maybe most societally damaging outcome of this inability of a lot of people to afford homes, right, is the high rates of homelessness in the state. So, people are affected in a lot of ways. If you can't afford the house here, you might be able to double up with family. You might decide to move to California or Nevada, right? But some people, end up staying, but with no home at all, right? So this is data from these point-in-time counts. So this is a good data resource for looking at homelessness over time. So every year, people across the country go out with clipboards on one night and go block by block through cities and try to count how many people are sleeping on the streets. So these are our totals across the state. Data divides it up into Honolulu versus neighbor islands and people sleeping in shelters. They don't have a permanent address, but in that night they were sleeping in a shelter versus people sleeping on the street. So, I'll talk about 2024 in a second, but before that, the rate was going up and down a little bit, but relatively stable, around 6,000 people in the state experiencing homelessness on a given night, according to this data. A bit of a shift away from sheltered populations to unsheltered populations. So, although the overall number has stayed relatively constant, it's become more visible because more people are sleeping on the street rather than sleeping in shelters. Underfunded programs, probably a lot of complicated reasons, right? But the outcome has been people sleeping on the street. Here, of course, is effect of Lahaina fires, right? So this spike in sheltered homeless population is mainly people displaced by fires who are then sleeping in government shelters in 2024, right? So we don't have 2025 information yet, but in 2024 we had returned to the highest per capita homeless rate of any state in the U.S. Right, so more people as a share of a population were without a house than anywhere else. A little bit of this is hopefully when the rebuilding efforts continue in Maui, people will be able to be put back into homes, but for the time being. We have the highest homeless rate in the country, and even before the situation on Maui, we were among the highest homelessness. So I think a very $1 million question is sort of why is this and what can we do about it? So one argument is people need to be provided with income and job opportunities, which is part of the story. But most of the research on this finds that homelessness is really a housing problem, as one book put it, or it's really about the prices of homes and the ability of people to afford them. So this is graphing the median home value across the 50 states and the homelessness rate. So this is in 2022 before the effect of the fires on Maui. So we were among the highest in terms of per capita homelessness, and obviously the highest home prices. Right, there's a fairly good correlation here, right, suggesting places with really high home prices tend to have high rates of homelessness. If we were looking for like the model state that seems to have essentially gotten rid of homelessness or solved homelessness, we labeled Mississippi down here, right? So this Mississippi, very low home prices. But also interestingly, the poorest state in the U.S., right, in terms of income, right? So you might think the poorest state would also have high rates of homelessness, people having trouble affording homes, but not the case, right? So it really is much more tied to home prices than it is the income distribution. I think more research to be done there, but I think there's some interesting reasons. I mean, one is from the personal level. If you were a low-income person in Mississippi, there's quite a few options in terms of like low barrier housing, right? So cheap rental units. I think trailer parks play a big role actually. So sort of the first rung on the housing ladder for a lot of people in southern states is the ability to rent a trailer, right? But here we make them generally illegal to build, right? These sort of bare bones, housing options are more difficult to find here. But I think on the other side, from the government's perspective, right, the ability to fund a public program that would provide housing for low-income folks It's just much more expensive here because the price of housing is high, right? So if you were a policymaker in Mississippi trying to address homelessness, for $500 a month, right, you could just rent an apartment for someone, right, temporarily probably, right, but you could run a program on a relatively small budget. But here, when we're producing dedicated units that are meant for people who are experiencing homelessness, the price tags can be $700,000, $800,000, right? Just because the costs of building homes here is so high that it makes these money put into these public programs not go very far because it's so expensive to procure housing. So, I think throughout, it's important to try to keep thinking of why have we allowed housing to get so expensive? Why is housing so expensive here compared to other places? And I think supply and demand is going to be one story. So, I like this graph. This is from the fact book last year. So this is looking at comparing the change in housing supply over a 5-year period across the counties compared to the change in rent growth relative to the state average. So yeah, on the left side here, we're looking at what the Census Bureau says the overall housing stock has done over this 5-year period. So, in Honolulu, built some condos, some single-family home developments, out towards Aiea. According to the Census Bureau, we've added about 7% to our housing stock over a 5-year period, right? So, in terms of yearly growth, it's less than 2%, right? It's not a fast rate of housing production, but we're adding a little bit of housing every year. On the Big Island, about half that rate, but still positive. And then interestingly, on Maui and Kauai, according to the Census Bureau, they're actually losing housing units over this period. So, it's not so much about tearing down housing, I think, as this is capturing conversions of residential units to vacation rentals. So, the little bit of housing production that's happened on Maui and Kauai recently has been more than offset by people converting prior local residences into vacation rentals. It's essentially no housing production period. So then if we look at changes in rents, which should be really just a consequence of how many people are looking to rent a home versus how many rental units are available, right? Really just about supply and demand. We see this graph on the left, perfectly inverted on the other side, right? So Maui and Kauai, who didn't build or add much to housing stock over this period, saw much higher rent increases over this period compared to the state average, right? So, all counties' rents have creeped up over this time, but this is looking at relative to the state average. Kauai and Maui have had 40 or 50% higher annual rent growth compared to the state average, and Honolulu and Hawaii had lower than the state average. So, just mentioning vacation rentals, we also have this good data set we use. It covers all the vacation rental listings in the state over time. So, in those neighborhood level data pages, we have trends in vacation rental listings for every neighborhood, which is interesting to look at. Particularly as you're thinking about different policies that come in and out on regulating vacation rentals. But your hero has also done some general work about what's the likely impact of vacation rentals on the housing market. Here's just a graph. This was from a few years ago, but this was our best estimate of the percentage of housing stock that was used up by vacation rentals. So basically, we had very good data on Airbnb and not so good data on the other platforms. But this was our attempt to reconcile them, and I think this estimate's probably quite close to reality. So on Maui and Kauai, we estimate about 15 to 17% of the overall housing market is used as vacation rentals, right? So, this is a huge share of our housing, right, that is going to vacation rentals. On Big Island, about 8%. Honolulu, about 2.5%. So, when you talk, if you sort of follow sort of national debates about vacation rentals and their effect on policy, you can find lots of articles in New York or Los Angeles saying that the reason homes are so expensive is because they're all being used as vacation rentals. Not really true. It's playing a role, right? But a couple percent of the housing market is used as vacation rentals. Honolulu is actually sort of in the same ballpark, right? So, as a sort of, if we're going to tell one story about why homes are expensive in Honolulu, I think vacation rentals is probably not it. It's a contributor, but it's not the whole story. But I think if we're talking about Maui and Kauai's market, it's an entirely different ballgame, right? So the sort of pushback against, scapegoating vacation rentals doesn't apply in these markets for sure, right? Because it is just an enormous share of the market. Yukiro did a couple of reports about the policy changes on Maui and the likely impacts of getting rid of vacation rentals. So, haven't followed it, right? This is Minatoya list. They're going to try to phase out about 7,000 vacation rentals on Maui, converting them to housing for locals. This is half of the overall vacation rentals, right? So we take this sort of Maui bar from like 16% down to 8%, and all of those other housing units would have to go back to the local supply, right? So in our one projection was that condo prices would go down between like 20 and 40%, right? Which seems like a lot, but since this policy has been considered, right? If you look back over the last couple of years, Maui condo prices have already gone down by about 20%. Right? So big decrease in the prices of condominiums on Maui, and a big change in the ability of people to potentially afford them, for local people, right? Suggesting this policy really does matter, right? So if you affect a policy that raises housing supply, on Maui by 8% or something, this is a huge increase in supply, right? And you'll see, similarly huge changes in the number of units available and the prices, right? Which seems to be we have seen. Okay, so this is looking at our current housing stock. So, sort of thinking about the price trends we talked about, right? So you would think, prices are basically higher, this decade than they've ever been. Prices have gone up pretty consistently over the decades. From the perspective of a developer, you might think now is like the time you would want to build a big condo building or add a new subdivision, right? Because home prices are so high, you could make a lot of income from selling or renting those units. But what we kind of see is the opposite, right? So there was the big housing boom building boom in the state in the 1970s. And, every decade since that, we've built less and less housing. Right? So, 2020s aren't done yet, but when they are, I think the bar will be something like half of the 2010s bar, right? So every decade we build less and less, even though prices are going higher and higher, right? So, this is a bit surprising and, extremely damaging to, trying to address rising prices, right? And, I think this is, if I had one graph that would explain, why we're in a housing crisis, why homes are so expensive, and so if people can afford them, I think this would be it, right? We just simply don't build very much housing anymore. Demand has been consistent, more or less, right? So, we have generally very high demand, and you don't add much supply, you're going to see high prices. So, I think I'll go fairly quickly over this, but I'll just sort of direct you to our website. A big sort of pillar of sort of our research that we've done is a lot around the impacts of regulation on the housing market and sort of the inability to expand supply because of government regulations that make it very difficult to build housing. So, one of these is zoning. So this is, an impact across every housing market, right? Local governments set up rules limiting the amount of housing that can be built, density restrictions, height restrictions, parking restrictions, lots of different restrictions that prevent you from building housing. This is just looking at sort of, the highest level, across the state, where is it like legal to build housing, right? So, one argument about Hawaii would be, we're a chain of islands, so it's very difficult to build housing. This limits supply, and that's why homes are expensive. A little bit of truth to that, right? But on top of our limited supply of land, regulations have played an even bigger role, I think, in limiting the amount of land we have to build on. So Um, Only about 4% of land in the state you'd be allowed to build housing of any kind. And the large majority of that is you know, low density housing. So historically single family. Now we have quite a few rules that say you can build a second or third accessory unit on those plots of land. So not strictly single family anymore, but very low density. If we're talking about where you could build a condominium, an apartment, it's 0.3% of land in the state, right? So just these purple areas on the maps are where you would legally be allowed to build an apartment, right? So the rest of the places we say it's not allowed. It's illegal to build an apartment. For many of these areas, to be clear, great reasons for this. We all want to preserve, ecologically sensitive areas. A lot of these areas are mountainous, so you couldn't build on them anyways. Preserving agricultural land is, a priority. But even sort of within areas described as urban, right, we still make it very difficult to build multifamily housing. It's still not allowed in most places. So, on top of that, if you, were a developer and you were able to find a piece of land in one of these purple areas and you wanted to build an apartment, right, to add to supply, on top of this, we also have an extremely difficult permitting process to get permission to build housing. So we're still sort of finalizing this data, so this is preliminary, but it'll look something like this in the final version. This is the number of days it takes to get a permit. This is for all of the permits issued in 2025 for housing projects, either single family or multifamily. So, if we're thinking of how long it takes to get your permits to build your apartment building on Honolulu, for ones that were issued in 2025, the average developer waited almost 600 days to get their final permission from when they initially submitted their plans to when they got final approval. So, we had done some research comparing this to other jurisdictions. We're something like 3 or 4 times longer in Hawaii on average to get a permit compared to other US jurisdictions. Right? We are way outside of the mean for how long it takes to get a permit. And if you think of this from the perspective of the developer, right, when you're waiting these 600 days, you've already put investment into this project. You've already paid an architect to make plans. In a lot of cases, you've already purchased the land, right? So having to sit on that capital investment for a couple of years is incredibly costly, right? So this makes potentially housing that does get built end up being more expensive for people because developers have to absorb all of these costs. And I think even more importantly, this means that a lot of projects just will never get built or even considered at all, right? Because there's this huge chilling effect on developers that, it takes a very brave developer to be willing to wait 600 days and absorb all of the uncertainty that comes about with that process. I think there's a lot of projects that just never get started because how onerous are this is looking at it over time. It doesn't seem to be getting better. If anything, it seems to be getting a little bit worse in terms of wait times. Just cognizant of the time. Okay, sorry, I have time. Okay, so this is referencing another report we had done on sort of regulatory burdens to producing housing. So the sort of method of this report is available on our website as well, was to sort of say in a little bit of a naive way, what should it cost to build a condominium, right? So if we're thinking, land can be expensive here, construction costs can be expensive here, but say the government or a developer was just going to go out and buy a piece of land, buy some lumber, pay some workers to construct an apartment building or a condominium, what would be the cost to do that? So, using some data on those various inputs, we came up with, something like $750,000. Sorry, is the cost of what a new condo is in reality. And we found that about 400,000 of that was not related to land or construction costs, right? So final sticker price of a condominium, right? If this is the size of the whole building, and then the input costs in terms of labor and materials is purple here, and land, if you're building a large condominium, it's not a big input. We divide it across all units of the building. So we find the majority is unrelated to construction costs and costs, even though construction costs in Hawaii are higher than anywhere else. It's us and Alaska basically that have the highest construction costs for condominiums, and land costs are also the highest here compared to anywhere else. But we're talking like 10 to 30% more expensive for these types of inputs in the construction process. Whereas, as we said at the beginning, our home prices are 2 or 3 times what they are in other places, right? So as sort of a full explanation for why homes are expensive, land and construction costs don't really seem to cut it. This is sort of thinking in a world where there was no regulations, right? We didn't have all of these other costs imposed on construction. There's like direct monetary costs if you wanted to build a condominium in Hawaii, right? The government will ask for millions of dollars, direct contributions to improving infrastructure, school fees, park fees, things like this. Sort of more implicit costs. So all of these zoning rules that require you to add parking, for example, including affordable units within your development, or else paying into a fund to provide affordable units. The cost of permit delays, interesting to think about the role of developer profits. So, the projects that do get put through, right? Developers typically make a tidy profit on them, right? But, I think it's interesting to think of that in terms of the risks that are taken up by developers, right? So, the only way a developer would be willing to, go through this high risk process and this wait time, right, is if they can at least hope that they're going to make profit, right? So it's true that, we do see significant profits on typical condominium construction buildings, right? But if those weren't, the carrot, right, then, developers wouldn't be willing to do these at all, right? And I think, developer profits are really a symptom of a highly regulated environment where, in order to get a building through, you have to be, very savvy in terms of, lobbying, legal maneuvering, right, to get these permits approved, right? Sort of a very uncompetitive market for multifamily housing construction. So the developers who are able to navigate it, tend to capture profits in that process. Anyways, there's more details on sort of our methods in the report if you're interested. But our big sort of takeaway was I think the majority of reasons why, at least for the condominium market, why prices are so high is because of these regulatory burdens that we put on developers, making it extremely hard to add to housing supply. Okay, so I think I'll very quickly highlight one other project. So we just released a blog based on this paper. So this was something I've been working on quite a bit over the past year, thinking of housing filtering as a process. So then this is sort of saying, okay, very difficult to build housing. What happens when we actually, succeed in building a new condominium? So this project was looking at a specific condominium, and we just did like a very deep dive into where people came from, where they were living before they moved into this condominium, and trying to estimate sort of the aggregate market effects of building a new condominium. So we had this cool data where we could track people to prior addresses, trying to think about the broad market consequences of adding to housing supply. So, we build a new condominium, units are quite expensive. Most of us couldn't afford to live there. It's only a few hundred units, or, in this case, we have 500 unit building. Relatively few people in terms of the overall population will ever live, in this building, or will ever live in a new building at all, right? So most lower income folks and most folks in general will just circulate through the, quote unquote used housing market, right? Like either as renters or purchasing a resale property. So, the question sort of is, why do we even build new housing, right, if it tends to be so expensive? And the argument here is that we build it because it generally loosens the supply of housing and creates opportunities that sort of pull through the housing market. The sort of idea, this is like one example of someone who moved into this particular condo. We can find their prior address. They moved from a single family home in Hulihia. So, they moved from a nice home into a nice condo. So that's nice for him, but like maybe that's not that important to the aggregate housing market. But sort of the important observation of this paper is when he does that, he leaves behind his prior address. So it becomes vacant for someone else. And then in this data, we can find a family that moved into his home, leaving behind a single family home in Hawaii Kai. Someone moved from Mililani into their home, someone moved from Kalihi into their home, someone moved from Makiki into their home, right? And by creating this one condominium unit, we've sort of kicked off this chain of moves, right? All of these households are able to move into a home they prefer more, right? There's like some welfare benefit to this, right? And we've increased, the number of vacancies, listed homes significantly in the market. Overall, we find about 200 across the Oahu. We sort of have incomplete data, but so the methods we use in the paper, we estimate that building this one condo created about 500 additional vacancies across the market. Those vacancies tended to be more affordable, right? And we sort of go into this detail in the paper, sort of the characteristics of the units that are freed up by producing new housing. Right? All of these beneficial moves that were able to occur because we added to housing supply, which wouldn't have happened if we blocked that particular. Okay, I probably talked too long, but so sort of to summarize, so it's true, incredibly expensive housing market. This is sort of our starting point. It's an extremely big challenge. Probably the biggest challenge that's facing our state. Very broad consequences in terms of economic sustainability of the state and just sort of an existential crisis of people being able to stay in Hawaii. Typical homes are not affordable to most people on local incomes. And I think the big sort of story is like our failure to produce housing over recent decades has, put us in this position where we don't have enough housing for people, and this is led to very high home prices and low affordability. So, I think when we're thinking about what the solutions are, I think supply and demand is always a good framework. So, trying to think about evaluating policies in terms of, whether and how many units this would add to our housing supply, or on the demand side, if we're thinking about vacation rentals or something, would this policy sort of meaningfully shift the demand for housing? The answer to both of those questions is no, and that probably won't be an effective policy for affecting prices. If the answer is yes, then interesting to think about the consequences of shifting policy. Okay, I will stop talking, but thanks a lot for your attention, and be happy to take any questions.